They did what? I watched my husband's face transform from confusion to hurt to anger in the span of seconds as he processed what I just told him. I hated being the bearer of bad news, especially with Christmas just 2 weeks away. But there was no sugarcoating this. Your mother called while you were in the kitchen, I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. She said they think it's best if we don't attend the family Christmas this year. Because of the cafe? David asked, already knowing the answer. I nodded, remembering the barely disguised contempt in Evelyn Harrington's voice. She said something about not wanting to dampen the holiday spirit with talk of our unfortunate business situation. David closed his eyes, a muscle working in his jaw. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. But not surprising, at least not to me. The Harringtons had never fully approved of their eldest son marrying someone they considered beneath their social standing. I, Melissa Chen, daughter of Chinese immigrants who owned a small grocery store, was decidedly not what they pictured for their blue-blooded son. For years, they'd maintained a veneer of polite acceptance, especially after David had become a successful investment banker. But when we'd made the decision to leave the corporate world and open our dream cafe 6 months ago, that veneer had rapidly cracked. Quitting a perfectly good career to serve coffee, Evelyn had remarked during her first and only visit to Clear Day Cafe. Well, I suppose everyone needs a hobby. It wasn't a hobby. It was our passion project, a bright, airy space with floor-to-ceiling windows, serving ethically sourced coffee and my mother's Asian-inspired pastries alongside traditional cafe fare. We poured our savings and souls into it, and for the first few months, business had been promising. Then the economy took a downturn. A major office building nearby announced layoffs. Construction on the street disrupted foot traffic. Suddenly, our comfortable financial cushion began to thin. The Harringtons, with their old money and country club memberships, viewed our struggle not with sympathy but with something closer to vindication. This Christmas disinvitation was just the latest in a series of small humiliations. I'll call her back, David said, reaching for his phone. I placed my hand over his. Don't. Please. Mel, I'm not going to let them treat us like this. And what will arguing accomplish? They've made up their minds. I squeezed his hand. Let's have our own Christmas. Just us, in our little apartment above our struggling cafe. I meant it to sound defiant, even a bit humorous, but my voice caught on the last words. The truth was I was exhausted, tired of proving myself worthy to the Harringtons, tired of the daily struggle to keep our business afloat, tired of watching David torn between his wife and his family. He must have heard it because he pulled me into a tight embrace. Hey, he whispered against my hair. We're going to be okay. The cafe is going to be okay. How can you be sure? I asked into his shoulder. Because I know something they don't. He pulled back, a mysterious smile playing at his lips. I was going to tell you tomorrow after I got official confirmation, but now seems like the right time. Remember that angel investor I mentioned? The one who was interested in our business model? I nodded. A month ago, a man named Marcus Zhang had visited our cafe multiple times, always asking thoughtful questions about our operations, our sourcing, our vision. David had been convinced he was considering an investment, but after initial conversations, we hadn't heard back. He called today. His investment group wants in, not just a small stake. They're talking about a significant infusion that would allow us to not only stabilize but expand. My heart leaped, then immediately plummeted. This isn't out of pity, is it? Did you tell him about our situation? David shook his head firmly. I've been completely transparent about our current challenges, but that's not why they're interested. They believe in what we're building, Mel. They see the potential even if my parents can't. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. How significant is significant? David named a figure that made my eyes widen. It was enough to pay off our business loans, renovate the unused second floor of our building, and still have operating capital to weather any further economic storms. There's one condition, he added. They want us to consider a second location. Apparently, they've been looking at commercial properties in several areas, including Oak Ridge. I froze. Oak Ridge? As in the ritzy suburb where your parents live, where the median home costs more than we'll make in a decade. The very same, David confirmed, a mischievous glint in his eye. Apparently, there's a prime commercial space available that would be perfect for an upscale cafe. Your parents would have a fit, I said. unable to suppress a small smile at the thought. Probably, but they're not the ones signing the checks. He kissed my forehead. So what do you say? Ready to become Café mobiles? I laughed for what felt like the first time in months, one step at a time. Let's see the investment agreement first. The agreement, as it turned out, was even better than we'd hoped. Marcus John's investment group, East West Ventures, wasn't just offering capital. They were offering expertise, connections, and a vision for growth that aligned perfectly with ours. They loved our fusion concept and believed it could thrive in upscale areas like Oak Ridge. By January, we'd signed the paperwork. By February, renovation on our original location was underway, transforming the neglected second floor into an elegant event space for private parties. By March, we were scouting locations in Oak Ridge. Through it all, communication with the Harringtons remained strained. David spoke with his younger sister, Grace, occasionally, but his parents maintained a chilly distance. We hadn't been invited to Sunday dinners, family birthdays, or the annual Easter gathering, not that we'd had time to attend with the cafe's expansion keeping us busy 7 days a week. Have you told them about the investment? I asked David one evening as we reviewed plans for the Oak Ridge location. We'd found a beautiful space in a historic building just 2 blocks from the Oak Ridge Country Club where the Harringtons were founding members. Not directly, he admitted. Grace knows some of it. I'm sure she's passed along the basics, but not the scale of it, or the Oak Ridge plans. He shook his head. I figured that would be a nice surprise. Speaking of which, he pulled out his phone and showed me an email. East West Ventures just acquired another property I think you'll find interesting. I scanned the email, my eyes catching on a familiar name. The Oak Ridge Country Club. They bought the country club. Not exactly. The country club was already owned by a hospitality group that's been struggling financially. East West acquired the hospitality group. David leaned back, watching my face. Marcus says they're planning significant changes to make it more modern and inclusive. Apparently, the current management is quite traditional. Traditional, I repeated, knowing exactly what that meant. The Oak Ridge Country Club was notoriously exclusive, with membership by invitation only and a reputation for catering to a very specific demographic: wealthy, white, and preferably descended from other members. They're considering bringing in new management, David continued casually. Someone with fresh ideas about hospitality and community engagement. I narrowed my eyes at him. David Harrington, what are you plotting? Me? Nothing at all. His innocent expression wouldn't have fooled anyone, least of all his wife. But if someone with expertise in creating welcoming, inclusive spaces happened to be interested in consulting on the project, I might have suggested they reach out to that person. You didn't. I did, he grinned. Marcus is very interested in your vision for what a truly modern club could look like. No pressure, of course. It would just be advisory at first. I sat back, mind racing. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had no experience running a country club, but I did understand hospitality, community building, and the importance of creating spaces where everyone felt valued. And the poetic justice of it, the Chinese-American woman deemed not good enough for Christmas dinner potentially reshaping the very institution that embodied the Harrington social standing, was not lost on me. I'll think about it, I promised. The opportunity to consult on the country club redesign remained on the back burner as spring turned to summer and our business transformation accelerated. Our original cafe was thriving with its new event space. Construction began on the Oak Ridge location, with a targeted opening in September. Then, in early July, I received an unexpected call from none other than Evelyn Harrington herself. Melissa, dear, she began, her voice dripping with a sweetness I'd never heard directed at me before. It's been far too long since we've caught up. I held the phone away from my ear for a moment, checking to make sure I hadn't misread the caller ID. Yes, it has been, I agreed cautiously. I've been hearing such interesting things about your little cafe. Grace mentioned you've been doing some renovations. We have, I confirmed, not elaborating. Let her ask specific questions if she wanted details. How lovely. It's good to see you and David making the best of things. She paused, and I could practically hear her gathering herself for the real purpose of her call. The reason I'm reaching out is that Richard and I are celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary next month. We're planning a rather elaborate party. Congratulations, I said automatically. Thank you, dear. Originally, we had everything arranged at the country club, but there seemed to be some staff problems there recently. Very unprofessional, lots of resignations. The whole place is in disarray. I bit my lip to keep from laughing. Those staff problems were actually a carefully planned reorganization by the new ownership, including the replacement of several managers known for discriminatory practices. I'm sorry to hear that, I managed. Yes, well, these things happen. The point is, Grace mentioned that you have a new event space above your cafe. I was thinking perhaps we could see it as a potential backup option. I nearly dropped the phone. After almost a year of being treated like an embarrassment to the family, Evelyn Harrington was asking to host her prestigious anniversary celebration at our little cafe. I'm sure we could arrange a tour, I said, mind spinning. Wonderful. How about tomorrow afternoon? Richard and I could come by around 3. The tour was surreal. Evelyn and Richard Harrington walked through our cafe and event space with the air of benevolent royalty surveying a quaint village. They nodded approvingly at the tasteful decor, the quality fixtures, the elegant table settings we'd arranged as an example. This is actually quite nice, Evelyn admitted, sounding surprised. Much more sophisticated than I expected. Thank you, I replied, choosing not to comment on her evident shock that we could create something beautiful. We've worked hard on the design. And you can accommodate 100 people up here? Richard asked, glancing around critically. Comfortably, I confirmed. We've hosted several corporate events of that size already. Have you? Business must be picking up then, Evelyn commented. It is. I smiled politely, offering no further details about our financial situation. After inspecting every corner and asking numerous questions about our menu, staff, and availability, they've huddled together for a brief consultation. Well, Richard announced, it seems this might work after all. Our anniversary is August 15th. We'd need the space from noon for setup, with the event running from 7 to 11. I'll check our calendar, I said, pulling out my booking ledger. I already knew we were free that evening. We'd been turning down bookings for that date specifically because it was the planned soft opening for our Oak Ridge location. But they didn't need to know that. I made a show of reviewing the calendar. It appears we do have that date available. Would you like me to pencil you in while you consider other options? No need, Evelyn decided. We'll take it. The country club situation isn't likely to resolve itself in time. Send us your standard contract and we'll get everything finalized. As they left, I heard Evelyn remark to Richard, well, at least now we'll have to invite them for Christmas this year. The smug condescension in her voice solidified a decision I'd been mulling over since their arrival. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus John. Marcus, it's Melissa Harrington. About that country club advisory role, I'm in, and I have some thoughts about the timing of certain announcements. The weeks leading up to the Harringtons' anniversary celebration were a whirlwind. Beyond our usual cafe operations and preparing for a 100-person event, we were putting the finishing touches on our Oak Ridge location, and I was deeply involved in the country club restructuring. Are you sure about the timing? David asked one night as we reviewed the final plans. It seems a bit theatrical. Since when are you concerned about theatrics? I teased. But yes, I'm sure he considered this, then nodded. Okay, I trust your judgment, and to be honest, I'm looking forward to seeing my father's face. The day of the anniversary party arrived and everything was perfect. The event space was transformed with elegant floral arrangements in cream and gold, Evelyn's chosen colors. The custom menu featured elevated versions of their favorite dishes. The staff was impeccably trained and dressed in crisp black and white. Evelyn and Richard arrived early to oversee the final setup, accompanied by a professional photographer to document everything. I greeted them warmly, noting with satisfaction the way Evelyn's eyes widened at the transformation of the space. This is quite impressive, she admitted. Executive director of the country club, she hissed. What exactly does that mean, Melissa? I met her gaze steadily. It means I'll be overseeing all operations, membership policies, and programming. The new ownership group has some innovative ideas for making the club more reflective of today's community. And who is this ownership group? East-West Ventures, I replied. The same investors who believed in our cafe when others thought it was just a hobby. They see value where others don't. The implication hung in the air between us. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. So all this time, while we thought you were struggling with your little cafe, you were actually building something significant. I finished for her. Yes. Why didn't you tell us? The question was so breathtakingly lacking in self-awareness that I nearly laughed. When would that have happened, Evelyn? Perhaps during the family Christmas we weren't welcome to attend, or maybe during one of the Sunday dinners we haven't been invited to in nearly a year. She had the grace to look momentarily abashed. We thought. We were concerned that we were failing, that David had made a terrible mistake leaving finance to open a cafe with his immigrant daughter wife. I kept my voice low and controlled. You thought we'd embarrass you in front of your friends. The irony is, we've been more successful than we ever imagined, while you've been hanging on to an outdated version of status and success. Before she could respond, I added, don't worry though, your membership at the club is secure. In fact, I've already approved the renewal myself. I walked away then, leaving her speechless, perhaps for the first time in her life. Later that evening, after the cake had been cut and most of the formal celebrations concluded, I found David chatting with his sister Grace in a quiet corner. There you are, Grace exclaimed when she saw me. The woman of the hour. David's been filling me in on all your secret success. I can't believe you managed to keep it quiet for so long. It wasn't intentional secrecy, I explained. We were just focused on building something solid before making announcements. Well, Mom's in a complete state, Grace said with undisguised glee. One minute she's outraged that you didn't tell them about your success. The next she's bragging to her friends about her son and daughter-in-law's hospitality empire. I haven't seen her this discombobulated since the club changed their dress code to allow women to wear pants in the dining room. David laughed. Has Dad said anything? Just that he'd like to see the business plan for the Oak Ridge Café. I think that's his way of extending an olive branch. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Richard approached us. He'd had several scotches and looked more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. Quite an evening, he said, surveying the room. You two certainly know how to make an announcement. We learn from the best, David replied. Mom has always had a flair for the dramatic reveal. Richard chuckled. That she has. He turned to me. Melissa, I owe you an apology. We underestimated you. Both of you, really. It wasn't the most gracious apology, tinged as it was with the implication that they'd only been wrong about our capabilities, not their treatment of us. But it was something. Thank you, Richard, I said simply. This country club position. It's significant, he continued. Many of my business associates are members. They'll be watching closely. I'm aware, I assured him. I understand the responsibility. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. I believe you do. He clapped David on the shoulder. Your mother wants a word before we leave. Something about Christmas plans. After they left, the staff began the cleanup process while David and I retreated to the small office behind the kitchen. He loosened his tie and pulled me into an embrace. So, he murmured against my hair. How does it feel to be the talk of Oak Ridge? I laughed. Honestly, exhausting, but also vindicating. My parents, I mean. I considered the question. I think they'll adapt. They're survivors, socially speaking. Once they process the shock, they'll find a way to incorporate our success into their narrative. Already happening, David confirmed. Did you hear my mother telling the Andersons that she always knew the cafe would be special? That it was just a matter of finding the right clientele? We both laughed at that. You know, I said thoughtfully, part of me expected to feel more. I don't know, triumphant. Watching their reaction, but mostly I just feel free, David supplied. Like we don't need their approval anymore. Exactly, I smiled up at him. Besides, the real satisfaction will come when I start implementing changes at the club. Wait until your mother sees the new inclusive membership policy and the cultural fusion events I'm planning for the fall. Now who's being theatrical? He teased. I learned from the best, I replied, echoing his earlier words. And speaking of theatrical, did I mention that the first major event at the newly renovated club will be a Lunar New Year celebration? I was thinking we might invite your parents to host a table. David threw his head back and laughed. Now that I would pay to see. As we locked up the cafe that night, I reflected on the journey of the past year, from being disinvited from family Christmas to overseeing the very institution that symbolized the Harrington's social standing. It wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about proving our worth, not to them, but to ourselves, about creating success on our own terms. And if, along the way, we manage to expand some narrow minds and heal some family wounds, all the better. After all, true success isn't just measured in profit margins or social standing, but in the communities we build and the barriers we break down. The Harringtons had called our cafe a hobby, our dream naive. But sometimes it's the dreams others dismiss that end up changing everything, including perhaps those who did the dismissing.
They say southern nights are warm. That night I froze. There were about 40 people in the backyard faces I recognized from church, old neighbors from our cul-de-sac, a few second cousins I hadn't seen since Grandma's funeral. String lights hung like stars between the oak trees, dipping low over folding tables covered in gingham cloth and Tupperware salads. Someone was playing soft country music through a Bluetooth speaker. People were laughing politely, passing around paper plates like we were the perfect family from a Sunday insert. I stood near the drink table holding a glass of sweet tea I hadn't touched. The ice had melted. My smile had too. I should have known something was coming. My father had been pacing the edge of the patio all evening like he was waiting for a commercial break in his own life. My mother kept smoothing down her blouse, pretending she wasn't watching him do it. And Mason, well, Mason had that smirk, the one he wore in high school when he'd crashed Mom's car and still got to keep his allowance. Then, like a thunderclap through summer humidity, it happened. "Claire!" My father barked loud enough to cut through the music. "It's time you sell that house." The backyard went silent. Not polite silent, not prayer before dinner silent. Stunned. He kept going, his voice sharp, a little too proud. "Your brother's loan isn't going to pay itself." My fingers tightened around the glass. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I looked to my mother. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. She just stood there, arms folded, eyes somewhere between bored and complicit, like she'd already written this moment in her head weeks ago. Mason didn't look at me. He was too busy checking his phone, or pretending to. I waited. Maybe he'd laugh and say it was a joke. Maybe someone would step in, Aunt Julie, who always liked me best, but no one moved. No one spoke. They wanted to see if I'd crack, if I'd nod and smile like I always did, if I'd give in, again for the sake of peace. But something in me, something quiet and buried, started to rise. I placed the glass gently on the table. My voice was calm. Almost gentle. "Then you'd better start packing." My father blinked. "What?" I looked at him, at both of them. My smile didn't reach my eyes. "You've got 30 days. The air changed, like someone had opened the wrong door and let winter in. A few murmurs began around the yard, questions whispered behind hands. I didn't answer them. I didn't need to, because they didn't know the truth. Not yet, and that was the best part. They said they didn't worry about me. They meant they didn't look for me. I learned early that in our house, fairness was a flexible thing. Mason was the baby, the only boy, the golden child with the dimpled grin and the boundless second chances. When he failed a test, it was the teacher's fault. When I got an A-, Mom asked if I'd studied enough. When he snuck out and crashed his car, sophomore year, Dad said, at least he came home. When I came home 15 minutes late from debate team, I was disrespectful. At 15, I was cooking dinner while Mason played Xbox in the living room. He had favorite meals. I had expectations. When I turned 17, I skipped prom so we could afford my SAT tutoring. Mason got a custom tuxedo for homecoming the same year, even though he dropped out halfway through the semester. And when I got into the University of Georgia on a full academic scholarship, they didn't come to orientation. Mom said gas was expensive that month. But when Mason dropped out of his third college, some tiny entrepreneurial institute in Florida, Dad drove down to help him move back. No one said, "We're proud of you." They said, "You've always figured it out, Claire. You're the stable one." But what they meant was, "You're not the one we lose sleep over, so we don't show up." I didn't throw tantrums. I didn't drink or skip class. I graduated early, got hired 6 weeks out of school, and never asked for help. I kept things moving on time. Under budget, emotionally efficient, I learned to send flowers for Mother's Day. I learned not to expect a card back. When Mason's first business failed a crypto podcast that never made it past episode 3, I helped pay off one of his credit cards, quietly. He never said thank you, just texted, "Got it, you're the best." When Dad had his first back surgery, I took off work, drove them to every appointment, coordinated insurance. At the follow-up, the nurse asked if I was his daughter. He said, "No, this is Claire," as if that clarified things. As if being Claire meant something separate from being his child. But I still hoped, still thought maybe, someday they'd see what I'd built. That quiet doesn't mean cold. That self-sufficiency doesn't mean I don't bleed. So when I bought my house red brick colonial wraparound porch, creaky stairs that felt like home, I sent them a photo. No filters, no caption. Just the place I'd worked 10 years to earn. Dad replied 2 days later, "Proud of you. Ever thought of putting it in the family trust? Safer that way. Mom called that evening so far out of town. 'Baby, are you sure it's safe to live alone?' No one asked what color I painted the walls. No one asked how it felt to hold the keys. A week later, Mason showed up unannounced. He walked through the house like he was shopping. 'You could Airbnb the basement,' he said, nodding help with the loan stuff. Our loan, he meant. His latest business imported phone chargers with military-grade tech had imploded again 2 nights. After that, Dad sat me down. 'Sweetheart,' he said, 'we've always been a family that supports each other. It's time you do your part. Sell this place. Help get your brother back on his feet.' I didn't speak, just smiled, and in that silence, something snapped. It didn't break. Not a loud thing, not glass shattering, just a soft, precise crack like the shift in a bone when it sets in the right direction for the first time. I wasn't going to explain myself again. Not for the loan. Not for the house. Not for the lifetime of being the daughter they counted on, but never truly counted. Let them think I would fold. Let them think I was still playing the part, because the next move was already in motion, and this time the paperwork had my name on every line. I let them think I was crumbling. Truth was, I was clearing the ground. I told them I'd think about it. That's all I said. No protest, no tears, no pointed questions about how many times I'd bailed Mason out before. Just a nod, slow and calm, like someone preparing to surrender. And that's exactly what they expected. I could see it in the way. Dad's shoulders relaxed. How Mom offered to send me casseroles just to help with the transition. Mason gave me a half pat on the back like he was doing me a favor, accepting my sacrifice. No one noticed my hand tighten around to the edge of the table, or how I pressed my lips together to keep from laughing. They thought I was agreeing to give up everything I built, and in a way, I was. Just not the way they imagined. That weekend, I called my attorney. I'd found her years ago after Mason tried to use my name as a co-signer for a personal loan without telling me. She was sharp, discreet, and didn't ask unnecessary questions. I liked that about her. I need to move the deed into a single-member LLC. I told her, and I want to do it quietly. No public paper trail, she asked, preferably not one they can follow. It took 3 days. I moved the house, the land and the utilities into the name of Clear and Westcott Holdings LLC, a name close enough to throw off anyone skimming but legally mine in full. I made myself both managing member and registered agent. Then I called a property management company, told them I'd be taking an out-of-state contract and needed someone to maintain the house, while some family friends stayed for a while. All utilities were rerouted, mail held, the address reclassified under a trust forwarding system. That Monday, I handed over the keys. "You can stay here," I said gently, "just until I figure out what to do next." Dad clapped me on the back like I'd finally learned something. Mom looked misty, calling it a full circle moment. Mason didn't say much, just parked his BMW in the driveway like he owned it, and I moved into a small rental 15 minutes away. At least, that's what I told them. The house I chose was modest white siding, little garden out front, 2 bedrooms and creaky floors that reminded me of my college dorm. It came with old blinds and low ceilings and not much light, the kind of place people assume is a step down. But the paperwork, that house was mine too. Purchased, months earlier under a different LLC, a different address, a different forwarding agent. Everything clean, separate, invisible. I even had fake lease documents drawn up just in case they decided to snoop. A week later, I invited Mom over for tea, just to finish the scene. She sat stiffly on my sagging sofa, looking around like she was touring a crime scene. "Bit of a downgrade, isn't it?" she asked, sipping from the chipped mug I gave her. "But it's good you're learning to live within your means." I smiled. "Yeah, I'm learning all kinds of things." That night, I lit a candle and sat on my own front steps barefoot, letting the wind carry away the last of what used to hurt. They thought I was giving up. They didn't know I was just getting ready. They walked barefoot on what they thought was a gift. It was a fuse. By the second week, they'd made themselves comfortable. Mom replaced the curtains in the living room, said my taste had always leaned too cold. Dad rearranged the den so the recliner faced the window, just like in their old house. Mason brought in his old gaming chair and set it up in what used to be my home office. He laughed while he did it, said something about reclaiming space. No one asked if I minded. I dropped by once or twice that month, just enough to sell the image. I brought over groceries, some mail they'd forwarded to the house, a six-pack of the craft beer Dad liked. I parked on the street, wore flats, said things like, I'm managing, don't worry, and it's not forever. They believed every word. Mom started inviting neighbors over for coffee again. At one point, I saw a photo on Facebook, Mason leaning against the front porch grinning beside a sign that read, Fresh Start. Claire didn't get tagged. I kept the notifications anyway. There was something oddly satisfying about watching them nest, like watching someone carefully redecorate a hotel room without realizing checkout was already scheduled. The management company handled the paperwork. Quietly, monthly statements were sent to my private business address. I reviewed the tenant agreement again and again, not because I needed to, but because it felt good, concrete legal mine. Some nights I sat at my new kitchen table eating cereal straight from the box laptop open to nothing in particular, listening to the hum of quiet that comes with space no one else thinks they own. I wasn't angry, not anymore. What I felt was sharper, colder, not rage, but readiness, a kind of practiced calm that comes after too many years of being told you were too much or too independent. They thought I was licking my wounds. I was lining up my documents. Then came the invitation. Mason was throwing a party. A small gathering, he said, just family and close friends celebrating a milestone. Apparently, the loan was officially paid off. They had managed to handle it. The house had been a sacrifice, Mom said, but one that brought the family together again. The theme was fresh starts. She texted me, wear something light. Baby, it's a celebration of new beginnings. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I opened the drawer beside me, pulled out the folder labeled Exit Inside, Deed. Copies, tenant notices, time-stamped signatures, I slipped them into a new envelope clean and white and sealed it with a piece of tape. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to shout. I just needed to wait until the toasts started. They raised their glasses to a lie. I raised the truth. The backyard looked almost identical to the night I left it. Same folding chairs, same string lights, same polite laughter floating beneath the smell of pulled pork and too sweet sangria. But this time I wasn't standing at the edge of the party with a melting drink. I was seated near the center, between the fake fern and the ice bucket like someone they'd allowed back into the circle. Mason was glowing. He wore a pale blue button-down and the expression of a man being slowly crowned. Mom hovered near him like a stage manager, smoothing his collar, fixing his hair. Dad had on his retired but still important face and stood by the grill like he was earning his keep, sat with a single glass of sparkling water, untouched the condensation slowly soaking into my napkin. I smiled when people passed, nodded when they said, "So proud of your family," said, "Thank you, though no one ever said what for." Near sunset, someone clinked a glass. Dad cleared his throat. "I just want to take a moment to honor what this family has been through," he began. "There were hard choices, but we made them together. Mason, son, you made it. Applause. Light-controlled and Claire," he said, motioning toward me. "Sold her home, her dream to help her brother. That's what family does." More applause. I held my breath for one long beat, then I stood up. My hands didn't shake, my voice didn't rise. "Dad's right," I said. "That is what family does." Silence fell fast, faster than I expected. But what family doesn't do, I continued, is lie. Manipulate and freeload off the one child who actually stood on her own 2 feet. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. White clean, marked only with today's date. Mason shifted. Mom blinked like I'd slapped her. "I didn't sell my house," I said evenly. "I never did." I opened the envelope and pulled out the deed. Then the tenant agreement. Then the notarized notice. I still own that house. This house. It's held under an LLC, which I created, which I control. You're not guests. You're tenants, asps now, chair scraped back. And as your landlord, I said, holding up the final page, I'm giving you formal notice to vacate. 30 days, effective immediately. No yelling, no swearing, no breakdown, just faces draining pale under string lights that suddenly felt a little too warm. Someone muttered, "Is this real?" Someone else whispered, "She planned this." I folded the documents, slipped them back into the envelope, sat down. No applause this time, just the sound of Mason breathing too loud, and Dad clenching his jaw like a man who just realized the will he assumed was inherited no longer applies. Mom looked at me, her lips parted, then shut again. She didn't ask why. She didn't need to because she already knew. They all did. They just hadn't thought I'd be the one to say it out loud with documents, not drama, with a deadline, not a cry. They thought I'd come to celebrate a lie. I came to end it. They thought I was burning the house down. I was just turning off the lights. The days after the party passed in a strange quiet. No dramatic phone calls, no midnight doorstep confrontations, just silence, thick, brittle, uncertain. Then one by one, they began to crack. Mason showed up first, not in person. He sent an email written like a newsletter apology. "Hey sis, look, things got a little heated. Maybe we can meet up, talk this through. It's been a rough year for everyone. I'm willing to move out, early if needed. Just don't make this worse than it has to be." I didn't respond. 3 days later, I received a formal complaint from a private lender. Mason had used a shell company to apply for business loans, names borrowed, co-signatures forged. My name came up during a routine flag on addresses, but I'd separated everything. Every LLC, every signature, every paper trail, untouchable. My lawyer forwarded the inquiry, attached a single line. "They'll come for him next." "You're clean, Mom," called that night. She didn't yell. She cried, "Claire, how did it get this far? Your brother is falling apart. Your father won't leave his room. I don't know what to tell people. They're asking questions." I listened, and then I told her the truth. "Tell them I stopped letting you lie about me." She went quiet after that. No more casseroles. No more group texts. No more. "We're proud of our Claire and Christmas cards." I never got. I drove by the house once a week before the notice expired. Dad was on the porch. Head in hands, Mason's car was gone. A small moving truck was parked halfway up the drive, back doors open. It was raining lightly. No one looked up. I kept driving. I wasn't angry anymore. What I felt was peace, cool and clean, like the air after a long storm. 6 months later, I stood in my new kitchen. The ocean beyond the glass was quiet, and the salt air rolled in with the sound of gulls instead of voices. The house wasn't big, but it was mine. Every window, every tile, every silence. It wasn't the kind of place you buy to impress people. It was the kind you keep to be left alone. I started a consulting firm. Quietly built it slow. Hired women like me. Quiet, capable, overlooked. The kind people assume will stay grateful forever. One of them called me a mentor. I changed the subject. Somewhere in that time, an article came out, "Women in Finance Shaping Legacy Through Law." My name was printed in clean serif letters beside a photo. I didn't know they'd taken me mid-laugh hair down, glass of wine in hand. A few days later, Mom sent a message. "We didn't know you'd done so well. The house in the article, is that yours?" No apology. Just surprised that I was never who they thought. I deleted the message. Then I turned off my phone. The thing about being underestimated your whole life is that when you finally rise, they can't follow. They're too busy looking for the girl who stayed behind. But she doesn't live here anymore. I didn't come back for revenge. I didn't come back to be forgiven. I came back so they could never rewrite me out again. I wasn't supposed to be in the program. That's what the official list said, what the glossy brochure handed out at every folding chair on the lawn confirmed. I searched 3 times, tracing each line with my finger, like a child looking for her name on a birthday card. It wasn't there. But hers was Abigail Hastings, Marketing and Brand Innovation with Distinction. Honors Cord noted my sister, who hadn't been enrolled since January, who had been quietly dismissed for academic dishonesty, low GPA, and what the student board called patterns of unverified documentation. She'd lied, she'd forged papers, and somehow she was still sitting near the front in a white robe. her curls perfect, her lips glossed. My parents waved at her empty chair like she was backstage preparing to walk. I stood behind the last row, my gown wrinkled from being packed in a $7 garment bag. My hair was pinned up with 2 broken bobby pins. The Chancellor's medal sat folded in an envelope inside my tote. They told me it would be announced live. No prior mention, not even in the program. That morning, I'd eaten half a banana and washed it down with cold coffee. I had slept 3 hours the night before, finishing a final code review for a faculty-led research project on infrastructure decay in coastal bridges. It was already archived online under my name. The dean stepped up to the podium with a clipboard I hadn't seen before. He cleared his throat. "We have a correction before we proceed. One of our previously listed candidates, Abigail Hastings, is not eligible for graduation." Gasps spread like wind through dry leaves. I didn't look toward my parents. I didn't have to. I felt it. The freeze in the air around their row, the halt of clapping the small sounds people make when someone's mirror shatters in public. Then the Chancellor stepped forward, but excellence often lives in quiet places. Her voice cut through the silence like a clean blade. "Please join me in recognizing Engineering Senior Claire, Hastings recipient of the Chancellor's Medal for Academic Resilience." And just like that, they turned to face the daughter they never expected to walk the aisle. It started long before college. In our house, there was no loud announcement of favoritism, no shouting matches or cruel ultimatums. Just quiet decisions, always leaning in one direction. Abigail got her acceptance to Lindale University. First early admission marketing track, full ride, no but. That didn't matter. My parents celebrated like she'd cured something. They ordered matching sweatshirts. My father reactivated his Facebook just to post the news. When I got mine 2 weeks later, a full scholarship to Whitmore's engineering program. My mother smiled politely and said, "That's wonderful, Claire. You always were so resourceful." That was the first time she used that word, resourceful. It became their reason for everything when they drained the college fund on Abigail's freshman housing deposit. They said I wouldn't need it. My tuition was covered. When Abigail called home, panicked over textbook costs, my father wired money that same afternoon. When I mentioned the $85 course fee for access to the simulation lab, my mother blinked and said, "Maybe your department has a grant." They always found ways to fund her needs. For mine, they found ways around them. Abigail called home twice a day. She'd FaceTime from rooftop parties, from Greek mixers, from study abroad, interest sessions she never attended. She never asked how I was doing. She didn't have to. I had already become the backdrop. By my sophomore year, I was working 3 part-time jobs, tutoring undergrads in Calculus 3, running inventory for the campus bookstore, and hosting late-night segments at the university radio station. I ate whatever was on clearance in the dining hall, or what could be reheated on my contraband hot plate. My dorm roommate once asked why I set my alarm at 4:55 a.m. Because the data server is empty before 6, I told her, and I need quiet to run code. When I did call home, I made my updates short. Abigail had more interesting things to say anyway. I once told them I'd co-authored a paper on fault-tolerant load-bearing frameworks for climate-vulnerable bridges. My father said, "That sounds complicated." "Hey, did you see Abigail's new internship?" Her boss said she's a natural resourceful. 2 different daughters, 2 different languages. They didn't see the hours. The hours I stood outside career fairs I wasn't invited to. The hours I spent debugging infrastructure models on borrowed equipment. The hours I sat alone in dark labs because my housing didn't renew and I couldn't afford a deposit. My mother sent Abigail new heels for her capstone showcase. She sent me a thumbs-up emoji when I emailed about getting published in the Whitmore Civil Engineering Review. The truth is, I never expected equal treatment. I just wanted acknowledgement. But that doesn't grow in the soil of families like mine. Not when one child shines loud and the other works quiet. It took me until junior year to stop waiting for praise. I printed my own certificate of the publication, laminated it, and pinned it behind my desk lamp. On days I didn't have food, I'd stare at it like proof I existed. That spring, I passed Abigail in the student center. She didn't see me. She was laughing with friends, holding an oversized iced coffee. Her nails glittered in the sun. She said something like, "My sister's still in engineering, like actual math. It's wild." They all laughed. I didn't stop walking. I had a lab to open, a network to train a bridge to hold, even if nobody else noticed it was cracking. By senior year, I had stopped trying to catch anyone's attention, especially theirs. My world shrank into clean routines: the morning walk from the commuter lot, the coffee machine in the engineering hall that sputtered before 8 a.m., the third computer terminal from the left in the structural modeling lab, the only one that didn't crash during neural net runs. I kept a notebook filled with hand calculations, one that smelled faintly of printer toner, and sleepless nights. It never left my bag. It wasn't sentimental. It was armor. On the inside flap, I taped a post-it I'd written my first semester: "Earn the dawn." I don't remember where I got the phrase, maybe from a podcast, maybe I made it up, but it became my spine. When the sky turned pale blue and the rest of the campus slept, I'd be hunched over load charts and failure graphs chasing a degree. Nobody expected me to finish. Professor Reed was the only one who noticed. She taught advanced structural systems with the kind of calm that felt earned. One evening after a colloquium where I presented my work on fracture detection in coastal pylons, she pressed a folded note into my backpack without saying a word. I found it hours later buried between power bars and class rubrics. "You are the quiet engine of progress. Keep building, IR." I read it once, then again, and then slid it behind my post-it. That night, I stayed in the lab until 2:40 a.m., eating dry cereal from a Ziploc and running simulations until the motion sensor lights flicked off. I waved my arms to turn them back on. It felt like the room understood me better than people ever had. Meanwhile, Abigail uploaded a filtered photo of a frozen margarita with the caption, "Spring break is a mindset." I saw it only because a mutual friend tagged her. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known where she was. The next morning, I walked into the machine lab, wet shoes squeaking on concrete. I had just learned that our bridge model had taken first prize at the Midwest Civil Systems Conference. The faculty team nominated it for a national research track. I forwarded the email to my parents. My mother replied with a single sentence: "I'm sure that'll look great on your resume." Abigail posted a video of herself dancing barefoot on a beach patio. Later that week, I overheard two faculty members discussing a university grant Abigail had supposedly received for a marketing capstone. Except the course she referenced didn't exist. The professor had left the department 2 semesters prior. It didn't take long to uncover more. She had forged summer enrollment forms again, emailed doctored screenshots of tuition receipts to my parents, and had the refund rerouted to her own account. With it, she rented a vacation house on the Emerald Coast. She didn't even hide it well. A friend's photo caught her holding a drink with a slice of watermelon the size of her face, standing on a balcony with ocean wind in her hair. That same day, I was in the sub-level lab, hands covered in graphite dust, adjusting load cells with a wrench that kept slipping. My back ached. My stomach churned from too much vending machine trail mix. I closed the window on her image, not in anger, just to protect my focus. I didn't tell our parents. I didn't report her. I was tired. And tired, I had learned, wasn't the same as broken. The medal announcement came 2 weeks later, an email with no subject line. "Claire Hastings will receive the Chancellor's Medal for Academic Resilience. Presentation is scheduled for commencement. Please do not publicize." I read it 3 times, then I clicked archive. It wasn't disbelief, it was something colder, something more precise. I had already built the bridge. Now they could decide if they wanted to walk across it or not. The email came quietly. No fanfare, no emoji, no accidental CC to the family group thread. Just a few lines from the dean's office per Chancellor Directive Medal recipient to remain unlisted until ceremony. Seating arranged accordingly. "Please confirm your attendance," I typed. Confirmed. Then I closed the laptop and unplugged it from the surge protector I shared with the lab's 3D printer. The night before graduation, it rained. Not a storm, not the kind that made headlines, just that thin, constant southern spring rain, the kind that soaks through cheap umbrellas and metaphors. Alike, I stayed late on campus. Not working. Just walking. I passed the student center, the library steps, the vending machine that once gave me 2 granola bars for the price of 1. Little grace notes scattered between years of noise. As I circled the back of the old art building, I saw someone sitting on the hood of a borrowed car. Even from a distance, I knew it was Abigail. Her hair was wet. Her mascara had carved 2 perfect tributaries down her cheeks. In her lap, a crumpled envelope stamped, "Notice of Academic Dismissal." She didn't see me at first. I approached slowly, quietly, like I might scare her into disappearing. When she did look up, her eyes were wide with something not quite fear. "Don't tell them," she said, voice hoarse. I didn't answer. I thought maybe they'd let me walk anyway. If I kept smiling, if I wore the robe. I didn't respond. I didn't ask why she lied, or how long she'd been planning it, or how much money she'd rerouted into rented balconies and plastic cups with pineapple rims. She looked down at her phone. Amber's still texting about the after party. Like none of this matters. I should have said something, anything, but the words felt irrelevant. Not cruel, not angry, just unnecessary. "I guess shame is still negotiable," she whispered. That was the last thing she said before I walked away. The next morning, the quad was all ready, half filled by 7:45. Folding chairs in tidy rows, honor cords gleaming, faculty robes fluttering in the breeze like prayer flags. My hair wouldn't hold the last pin, so I left it crooked. It didn't matter. I stood near the back with the engineering majors. My name wasn't in the program. There was no proud family post on social. My father had emailed the dean asking for special seats for Abigail. He wrote, "Our eldest daughter is receiving honors. We'd like to be near the stage." The dean's assistant replied politely, said the seating was general admission. Abigail's seat sat near the front, draped with her robe. My parents didn't notice it was empty. They waved, they smiled. They waited. They didn't know they were waiting for someone else entirely, and I didn't rush to meet them because I wasn't returning to be seen. I was returning so the silence would finally end. Halfway through the ceremony, the dean paused. She leaned toward the chancellor, who consulted a second clipboard, one that hadn't been on the podium earlier. A rustle moved through the crowd. Some parents shifted in their seats. A few students looked up from their phones. Then the dean stepped forward again. Her voice was steady, but it had a new edge. "We wish to acknowledge a correction to our previously published list. Abigail Hastings is not eligible for graduation and will not be receiving a degree at this time." It didn't echo. It didn't need to. The silence that followed did all the work. I didn't turn to look at my parents. I could feel the shift. Could imagine my mother's mouth half open, her hand frozen mid-wave. My father's fingers tightening around the program as if it might rearrange itself with enough pressure. A low murmur rolled through the seating rows. Not outrage, just discomfort. That collective flinch people do when the story they've accepted starts to tear at the seams. Then the chancellor stepped forward. But she said, looking up from the page, "Excellence often lives in quiet places." A pause. "Please join me in recognizing engineering senior Claire Hastings, recipient of the Chancellor's Medal for Academic Resilience." For a moment, no one clapped. Then a single burst of applause scattered tentative like rain tapping on a tin roof. And then the rest followed. I didn't look up. I walked the aisle with my eyes on the path ahead, past rows of caps, proud parents, confused siblings. The medallion they placed around my neck was heavier than I expected. Its weight surprised me. Or maybe it was just the moment finally catching up. When I returned to my seat, I didn't glance back. I didn't need to. They'd seen. After the ceremony, I waited by the stone fountain near the south end of campus, the one where graduates traditionally signed their initials in chalk. I didn't bring chalk. I brought a copy of my research paper and folded it into my coat pocket. Old habit. I heard their footsteps before I saw them. My mother still in heels too high for gravel. My father holding the program like it had betrayed him. Abigail trailed behind them, clutching her robe like a costume she hadn't earned. "Claire." My mother said first. It wasn't a greeting. It was a question disguised as my name. "Why didn't you tell us?" she managed. I looked at her. Her eyes were rimmed in mascara shadows. "I did," I said. "You just weren't listening." Abigail lowered her gaze. Her foot traced a nervous circle in the dirt. We didn't know," my father added as if that made it better. "I sent the paper to your email," I said, "the one about adaptive load response and suspension bridges." "You never opened it. That's not what we're talking about," he snapped. "We're talking about your sister, about this morning." "No," I said, voice calm. "You're talking about embarrassment. I'm talking about patterns. They didn't speak." I pulled the medal from around my neck and held it level. "This isn't just mine," I said. "It belongs to every late shift, every skipped meal, Every night, I slept in the lab because my housing fell through and I didn't want to ask for help. My mother let out a breath that was almost a sob. Abigail took a step forward. "So what?" she said, her voice thin. "You get to be perfect and I'm the villain." I looked at her. Really looked. "I'm not perfect," I said. "I'm tired, but tired isn't the same as broken." She blinked. Those 6 words landed harder than anything else I'd said. She turned her face away. My father folded the program, precisely as if he needed to control at least one thing in that moment. "I just don't understand," he muttered. "Why hide it? I wasn't hiding," I said. "You were looking the other way." The silence that followed was different than before. It wasn't awkward. It was conclusive. I turned back toward the quad, toward the empty stage, toward the crowd that had already started leaving. "Where are you going?" my mother asked softly. "To start something," I said. "Something that doesn't require anyone else to clap for it." Then I walked. Not fast. Not defiantly. Just forward. I didn't go to the family dinner that night. They'd made reservations months ago under Abigail's name. Of course, a steakhouse downtown with white tablecloths and chairs that scraped the floor too loudly. I imagined the 3 of them sitting there trying to explain the silence on the ride over, trying to rewrite the morning into something survivable. I spent that night folding laundry in the corner of my apartment, the one off campus I shared with 2 nursing students. My phone buzzed once, a message from my mother. "Proud of you. Let's talk soon." I didn't reply. 3 weeks later, I boarded a flight to Seattle. It was a one-way ticket. I had accepted an offer from a structural engineering startup, entry-level modest pay, but full autonomy and access to projects that actually mattered. Floating bridge systems, tide-resistant pylons, infrastructure that adjusted in real time, things that held weight. On my first day, I pinned the chancellor's medal to a corkboard above my desk, not centered, just enough to be visible. Beside it, I taped the post-it I'd carried for years. "Earn the dawn," and Professor Reed's note, faded but intact. "You are the quiet engine of progress." At lunch, I sat alone by the windows and watched gulls circle over the harbor. I pulled out a pencil and began sketching the early version of a load distribution model. Soft curves, tension lines, notes in the margins. It was the first time in years that my hands moved without exhaustion. Justice isn't a moment, it's a structure. Something you build, slowly, beam by beam, until even the people who doubted the blueprint stand beneath it and call it shelter. In July, my mother emailed again. The message was longer this time. She wrote about refinancing the house, how they'd used part of what was meant for Abigail's tuition to settle debts. There was something apologetic in the phrasing, though the word sorry never appeared. She attached a photo of my father fixing a broken porch step. She called it progress. I forwarded it to my archive folder. Fall in Seattle came fast. The air turned sharp, salt mixed with pine. I bought a second-hand coat and began walking home from work, just to feel something shift between me and the pavement. On Thanksgiving morning, a letter arrived. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar. Inside was a single photo. Abigail, hair pulled back, standing beside a brick wall, holding a Habitat for Humanity hammer. Her smile was sheepish. Below, she'd written, "Beams don't care who hammers them, they just hold." I pinned it beneath the post-it, not as forgiveness, just as proof. One Friday evening, the company invited me to speak at my alma mater, Whitmore, during Alumni Week. I almost declined, but then I thought of the fountain of the chalk basin filled with names. I returned quietly. No fanfare. After my talk on adaptive systems and failure recovery, a student approached me. First year, nervous eyes wide. "Do you ever wish they noticed earlier?" she asked. "Your family, I didn't answer right away." Then I said, "No, I just wish I had stopped waiting sooner before leaving campus." I walked to the old fountain. It was freshly washed, names erased, a clean slate. I took a piece of white chalk from my bag and wrote 3 small letters near the base, CH. Next to it, I drew an anemometer, my first science fair project back in 5th grade. It had measured wind speed with plastic spoons and a straw. My father never came to see it. Wind motion balance, the things that moved without applause. As I stood brushing dust from my hands, I looked out across the lawn where once they had clapped for the wrong child, not knowing the other was holding everything together. They couldn't erase me now because I was never invisible. just inconvenient to acknowledge. Now I was unignorable, and I wasn't waiting for them to catch up.